Hi, I'm Carolynn. I'm an addict, and my sober date is October 5th of 2019. I think that's the day that my life started, honestly, because I didn't really have much of a life before that. And like Rick James says, it's a CA miracle, honestly. So I am from Chicago, Illinois, and I love Chicago. I'm very proud to be a Chicagoan. Great people, great food, terrible weather. So I was born in Chicago, raised in the suburbs in an abusive family. And there was, a lot of emotional neglect, emotional abuse, physical violence, just the kind of stuff that I feel like breeds addiction. And I know a lot of us come from broken homes and situations that kind of raised us to cope in maladaptive ways. So I think that was a large part of what was brewing in me before I ever even started using. John will say that he was born an addict and was an addict before he ever picked up. And I feel similarly that, this was something that I was developed into. So I was a really depressed kid, obviously with an abusive family that was weighing on me, but I was also really heavily bullied in school. And I was just always depressed from as early as I can remember. My depression just got worse and worse and worse over the years. And then around middle school, I actually became suicidal, which was, it was kind of confusing because I didn't know anything about mental health. I didn't know what depression was. I didn't know why someone who had so much going for them would suffer when other people probably had reason to suffer more. I felt guilty of that, and I was consumed by thoughts of death. All I could think about was dying and rotting, and, it was horrifying. So there was actually a trend in my community of suicide. It's a social phenomenon called suicide clusters, and basically it's when a big amount of suicides happen in a community in a short amount of time. And so for me, when I got to high school, from my freshman to senior year, we lost 10 kids. I know one of them was cancer. Most of them were suicide. Most of them jumped in front of trains, which was kind of the popular way to go. And I feel that this kind of encouraged my suicidal tendencies because I'm a kid and I'm growing up in a world where suicide is normal, and everybody in my school is fucked up by it. We are going to funerals after sleepovers and stuff like that. Just, it wasn't normal, but it was normalized to us. So I think it emboldened me to want to follow through with it myself. I feel that if it hadn't been so prevalent in my community, I might not have tried to go through with it. But, everyone was doing it. So I tried to kill myself. I was 17, I believe, and I took a whole bunch of pills from my medicine cabinet. My friends took me to the ER when they found out. They made me chug charcoal, and I puked it all back up. It looked like The Exorcist, according to my brother. And I blacked out, woke up the next day and was taken to the psych ward. And I think that was a really pivotal point in my life because that was kind of the event that switched on addict mode. Up until then, I'd been a really good kid, a total goody two-shoes, totally innocent. My friends loved that about me. They cherished me for it. They would actively discourage me from drinking because I was the good kid. I was the innocent kid. But after my suicide attempt, I just felt this numbness where I didn't want to be alive, but I didn't want to die either. And I had to exist, and it was unbearable, and I had to cope somehow. So I started drinking. Drinking led to weed. Everything just kept progressing and progressing and progressing to the point where I'm showing up to school loaded. I'm ditching school to continue getting loaded. I'm ditching every class, and I'm sneaking out every night to go party with my friends. I was really quickly sinking into a spiral. And it wasn't long after I started using, only a few months, honestly, that I hit my first bottom. I was expelled from high school and sent to treatment. And the kind of treatment I went to is like kind of different than adult treatment because it was adolescent treatment, and adolescent treatment is like a whole different beast. It's considered the troubled teen industry. Great documentary by Paris Hilton if you want to watch about it. It's kind of sad, but the troubled teen industry is like pretty abusive, and I had a really hard time with that. I was pretty abused in my treatment. I was in treatment for a year, and the only thing I really got out of that experience was meetings, because they had AA meetings a town over from where my school was. I was in a boarding school, and they were at the Bill Wilson house, which is Bill Wilson's childhood home, which is like a huge part of AA history that a lot of people would be honored to go to. And I didn't know who this was. I didn't care. I just was going because, I'm in a lockdown facility. I have no opportunities to go anywhere. Of course, I'm going to get out of there for an hour. And they had popcorn, and they had a dog, and there were all these other reasons to go, until I started hearing stuff and relating to stuff and being like, wow, this is exactly how I feel. Like, these people somehow know everything about me, and it's just, I'm hearing it said back to me exactly who I am, and it was mind-blowing. But I still didn't really consider myself an addict. I thought that because I'd only used for a few months, that didn't really count. So, no, I'm not an addict. That's not me. I did stay sober for about a year and a half. After I got out of treatment, I moved here to Washington. Even though I'm from Chicago, my mom had moved here, and I moved in with her, and I was doing really well staying sober, but then she got breast cancer, and she was really sick. She almost died. It was almost stage 4. It was really bad, and she couldn't have me live with her anymore, so she sent me back to Chicago. And I was scared of that because all I knew in Chicago was using friends and connections, and I was kind of concerned that I might relapse, which naturally I did. I came home to my stomping grounds, fell right back into those relationships with people, started dating a dealer, and promptly relapsed. And it was really bad. My boyfriend, he hit an interesting bottom, I guess. It was Thanksgiving, and after dinner, he raped me repeatedly throughout the night, and then assaulted his family with a knife because they took his pipe, and he thought that would get it back, and then they called the cops on him. Cops took him to the hospital. His mom blackmailed me emotionally, said that if I broke up with him, he'd kill himself, so I ended up staying with him, and that was hard. I didn't really even get to process or grieve that event because I had to take care of him. I was looking for an out. So my mom suggested college, and I took a geographical. I went to Wyoming, where I studied outdoor education. I studied wilderness medicine. I was a wilderness EMT. I did all the things, but my life never got any better, because the thing about pulling geographicals is you go where you go. You're going to carry all of your baggage with you. So I was spiraling once again, and I was being bullied in school, which was really hard. I was very depressed. I was ostracized. I didn't know anyone in this entire state. And I just felt so broken down that I moved once again to Washington. At this point, my mom recovered from her cancer, which was great, but she was still taking meds, and she has a lot going on. She had the chronic pain, ADHD, anxiety. As you can imagine, that's a pretty fun cocktail. So I was stealing whatever prescriptions I could from her and couldn't stop myself. I remember there'd be times I'd be crawling on my hands and knees into her bedroom while she's dead asleep to just take pills off her nightstand and think, what am I doing? God, just stop. You don't want to do this. Stop. You can stop yourself at any point. You can turn around and go back. You can put them back. Just stop. And I couldn't. And I felt horrible about it. Ultimately moved out on my own, but I was still using, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to drug-induced psychosis. So anyone in here had psychosis? Yep. Oh, that's interesting. Sean, nice. I mean, it's not fun. It's scary. I mean, I don't know. Like, we've hit some similar bottoms. But, I went into drug-induced psychosis. But the thing is that it actually was more than that. It turns out that I have a psychotic disorder that was underlying the, trigger of the drug use. And when I went psychotic, it was, very, very severe. I was psychotic for over a year, and no one knew what was happening to me. My family didn't know anything about psychosis. They just thought I was acting really weird. And it got to the point where, I was thinking I was demonically possessed, trying to perform exorcisms on myself, like salt all over my apartment, trying to protect myself, altars everywhere. I started wandering a lot. I was scared that my apartment was bugged and the FBI was after me, and I had a lot of paranoia. I would wander for hours and miles, and I would just go for, 20 miles before something would stop me, and it was usually the police. They'd find me, they'd pick me up, they'd call my mom, they'd be like, your kid is not okay. You need to do something about this. But there were no hospital beds available, so I had nowhere to go, and I just kept putting myself in more and more danger until one day the FBI delusion, I thought that everybody in the town was a spying on me, and that they were anytime I saw someone on the phone, I thought they were making coordination to kidnap me. So I was panicking. I was scared for my life. I was in that survival mode where I would do anything to save my life. And I thought that if I took off my clothes, I'd be invisible. So I went streaking butt-ass naked in downtown Oak Harbor. It's not funny. It was one of the most traumatic experiences of my life, because what that resulted in was sexual assault by the police, because police picking up a naked girl can turn into some pretty illegal stuff that they think you aren't aware of. But I remember the entire department coming out to greet me, watching me get paraded butt-ass naked into the, department. They didn't cover me, they didn't clothe me. I mean, it's horrific. So I finally did get hospitalized, and I sobered up. I realized, this was something that was a problem. Once I came out of psychosis, I was told by my family, you can't do this anymore, you can't use drugs because this will keep happening. And I kind of took it seriously for a second, but after I got sober and I got into Oxford, it's I completely forgot all about that. I didn't really think, oh, well, it's a fluke. I didn't really go through that. That's not going to happen to me again. I didn't want to give up using, and I felt kind of it was unfair that I had to because of this stupid thing. And I never really wanted this. But, I kept in Oxford for a while, and I was fucking up the entire time. I was doing mushrooms and whippets and acid and coke and ketamine and whatever I could get my hands on in Oxford. Never got caught, amazingly, but I don't condone it. I don't think anyone should do that. It's just that I was reckless and I wouldn't stop, and I wasn't desperate enough to even care. I just wanted to use at any cost. And of course, this led me into another psychotic episode. I moved out of Oxford to live with a boyfriend, and, started partying really hard with him. And I went back into psychosis, but this time it was much, much, much worse. In this episode, I got evicted. Our partying kind of led us into an eviction, so I ended up couch surfing. Didn't really have a home, but, I was glamorously homeless. I wasn't entirely homeless. I didn't have anywhere permanent, but I was really good at finding places to stay. And I didn't see a problem with that, because the entire time that I was couch surfing, I had drugs, I had alcohol, I had what I needed, so I didn't care about my circumstances. And then I met a guy, I had known him from detox, actually. And years later we reconnected, and we kind of started dating, and and he was super predatory right off the bat. We dated for 1 week, and then after that week, he proposed to me, and I didn't really know what was going on because I was psychotic. Like, I thought that demons were after my soul, and so he was a god, and if I married God, then I'd be saved from the demons, so obviously this is my only choice. And then a week after that, we were married, and I ended up in this horribly abusive marriage where he was like feeding me delusions, telling me we were gods, and the most romantic thing he could think of would to be like die in a plane crash with me, and how we were immortal but we could choose our death, and he would want to do it that way. Like, he had me believing really, really dark stuff, which made my condition darker and darker and darker, to the point that I was having really horrific delusions of burning to death, where I would think I was like a monk being immolated, and I'd like look and see myself covered in flames. Or a lot of times I thought I was like ritualistically hanged, and that I couldn't die by being hanged, so I'd be hung over and over and over again, like every Friday for some reason. But every half hour is Friday, so. I thought I was a dog because I thought that doctors, in an effort to silence people who spoke the truth, would turn you into a dog. And so I wouldn't talk, I wouldn't speak. I thought I was all sorts of different people, like Hitler and Anne Frank and Aaron Ralston, that guy who lost his arm in a slot canyon in Utah. So naturally, I didn't have an arm either. I didn't even know what a toilet was at one point, and I was just peeing in buckets because, what's a toilet? I would look at it and be like, I don't even know how you use this. So it got really, really far gone. At one point, I thought that, my leg was rotting off, and so I wanted to cut it off with a saw. But after I put the saw to my leg, I freaked out and puked instead. It was really dark. And I think the darkest was when I had a delusion that I'd killed my husband. He was asleep one night, and I came into our bedroom, and I saw him lying there, and I saw him as chopped up pieces, and I believed that I'd killed him with an axe. And it was the worst feeling to think I was a murderer, and I fully believed it. And so I ran away. I ran away from home in the middle of the night, and I just wandered and wandered until I found some random guy with a pickup truck, hitched a ride into town, and wandered some more until I found a police officer, and I told her I'd killed him. And instead of taking me to the station, she took me to the hospital. And I swear to God, that's the smartest thing I've ever done, because in that marriage, he wanted me to be psychosis because I was complacent and I would be agreeable and I was controllable. So he would tell me that he wouldn't take me to the hospital. So running away from home and hitchhiking into town saved my life. When I got out of that psychotic episode, I was so shattered by it. I got an annulment because it was proven in court that I was mentally incapacitated and couldn't consent to a marriage. So I've never technically been married, so I've got that going for me. But you'd think after an experience like that, you would for sure be done using. That would for sure be a bottom, right? But honestly, it was the same old drag of getting into Oxford and pretending to want to be sober and really just thinking the whole time, my plan for when I'll move out so that I can get loaded again. And fortunately for me, something interrupted that plan, and that was John. He's the first good thing to come into my life. I was planning my exit. So I was at 11 months sober, and I had this grand finale in mind that I would get to 1 year and go to my birthday meeting on 1 year and then go home and smoke a joint to celebrate. That was my big idea. I did that, but it was instantly regrettable. But when I met John, this was before that. This was when I was still lying about wanting to be sober and pretending like I was in it to win it. And he actually was in it to win it. I didn't really like him at first. I thought that he just wanted to get in my pants, and I kept trying to shoot him down. I mean, at least he's honest. So like, for instance, he asked me on a date, but he said like, do you want to hang out? And I was like, oh, I can do something with that. So I brought a group of people to hang out, because hanging out's not a date. And I literally brought like 3 people and crushed his date. But he was after that, he was just such a good friend. And we ended up hanging out like every day and getting to know each other and having so much in common. And I thought like, wow, this guy's got like really great recovery. And like, I kind of feel bad that I'm lying about this, but like, he's actually like, he's solid. But the thing is, after we started dating, I was in a relapse and I lied about it for like months. And it didn't occur to me that in a committed relationship, relapse might kind of be an issue that might disrupt the relationship. So I had this like kind of awakening moment of being like, oh shit, I really care about this guy and I'm jeopardizing everything. And that realization of like, if I relapse, he might relapse. And then like, what if he leaves me? And it became like a very sobering thought to realize that I had put our relationship at risk, and I panicked. Like, I was so scared of losing him that was kind of actually the first thing that made me ever want to be sober. I'd been sober in the past for other people, to get them off my back, to get the doctors off my back, to get away from the consequences, but never sincerely. And literally the thought of losing John was like what kick-started it for me. And so I got sober on October 5th of 2019. And, you know, that was the greatest decision I've ever made. And, you know, he's been like crucial for me. Like, he's been like literally my other half, you know? But the thing is that when we started dating, he had like 4 months sober and I had like negative 3 months or whatever. And so we did start out early, like we had like a newcomer relationship. And sometimes people have kind of like used as an example of like, hey, newcomers can make this work. But I just want to say that it did not work. Like, it was a mess. Like, I was so awful to him. Like, I'm so glad you stuck with me. But I was like, I broke his trust. You know, I wrote notes about it in here. Let's see here.
I can tell you.
I was dishonest. There were trust issues, betrayal, guilt and shame, and I could go on because, you know, when I say I jeopardized our relationship, it was cutting it close. But the thing is that John and I, on our own, without even talking about it, had both agreed that our first priorities would be our recovery, and that our recovery would be separate. And that, you know, if I had an issue that I was talking with my sponsor, that didn't go to him, and vice versa. I didn't talk about where I was at in my steps with John, other than like, I'm on this step. Like, our programs were individual to us, and we weren't enmeshed in that way where we were like working each other's program. We both took it very seriously, because once I wanted this, I wanted it. I wanted it so bad, and I was so desperate. And part of the reason I was so desperate is because everything sucked when I got sober. Everything. I thought it was like some cosmic joke that my life just got worse and worse and worse in sobriety. And I was like, you have got to be kidding me. Like, everyone says it gets better, but they're all lying, because I'm miserable. I'd be barfing in meetings all the time being like, life sucks. This sucks. Why am I sober? I'm wasting my time. Like, this sucks. And people will be like, keep coming back. You're right where you belong. You're right where you're supposed to be. And I hated hearing that so much. Or people being like, oh, you're making such great progress. And I'd be like, I just spent 5 minutes crying in front of you. How can you say that to me? And the thing is that the reason it was so hard is that, for one thing, as I said, I tend to go into psychosis when I use, and I had been using for like negative 3 months or whatever. And I came into my sobriety psychotic again. And this time, getting sober wasn't enough. I stayed psychotic for the first half of my first year. I was in the hospital twice for psychosis in that year, once for suicidality in that year. I was in the hospital a fourth time my second year for paranoia. Another thing is a lot of people kept dying. My grandpa died. My friend died in my first 30 days. My dog died in my arms. There were several more people. I think in my first 2 years, I lost like 6, 7 people. Everyone was dropping like flies, and I had a lot of health issues. Like I got diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and was dealing with that because, when I was using, I was numbing out all of those problems and then having to feel again. Well, BPD's, like I like to call it big feelings disorder because it's a lot of rage, just pure rage. And so I'm raging out every day, multiple times a day, like couldn't even go in public without screaming in the grocery store. I scared people in meetings because I think on 2 different occasions I had rage episodes in a meeting, and they just happen. I know people have told me that it was scary. I mean, I'm not trying to scare anyone. Like one time they tried to take me to the hospital and I was like, no, this is fine. I'm good. Like this is me every day. Like this is my normal. But to everyone else, it seemed really extreme. And it was hard. It was really hard to live like that every day. And so I was desperate, I mean, there was like a year and a half I was on crutches. Like it just kept piling up. So I was so desperate that I would do anything, and I applied that to my program first and foremost. John and I would walk like 7 miles every day to meetings just to get to the first meeting. And then we'd walk like another 10 or 13 miles after that for the rest of our day going to meetings. We'd go to 3 meetings a day. During COVID, I was going to 4 meetings a day on Zoom, chairing a meeting illegally in the park, which was super cool, super renegade. I think it was like badass being sober during a pandemic. Like you had to be hardcore for your sobriety, Sean knows, in a pandemic. Like the lengths people went to just to go to one meeting was insane. When meetings started opening up again, we would drive like an hour to get to the nearest meeting. And it was really, really cool. I was going to this Zoom meeting every day where I thought everyone was from Canada, and it turns out they were from Stanwood. So yeah, I was leaning really hard into it. I was working really hard on my steps. I worked, I think, 2 rounds of steps in my first two or 3 rounds of steps in my first 2 years. Service positions, chairing meetings, everything I could, because I just needed to lean into the program as much as possible. Like my coping mechanism anymore wasn't, relapse. It was like white knuckling and showing up and doing whatever I could to stay sober, because I knew that the only thing that would make everything worse was a relapse. So aside from that, I got better. It just took a long time. It wasn't until like my 3rd year that I started to get better. And it was gradual. Like people started noticing a psychic change in me before I ever did. And they'd tell me I was different, and I'd be like, I'm miserable. I don't know what you're talking about. But it started to get there. Like I worked really hard in therapy. I learned that applying the principles to all my affairs looked like, eating right, sleeping right, like hygiene, like everything, like actually taking care of yourself, which I'd never done before. So I learned a lot of therapy tools. I learned dialectical behavior therapy. I applied I worked hard, and I ended up coming out of the BPD episodes. I went from having them every day to maybe once a week to every couple weeks. And I've had 2 this year, like that last 2024, like 2. And that was huge. And I just want to say that we had a really interesting relationship during that time, because John was actually my caregiver in addition to my partner. And I think that, I know there are people in this room who've been caregivers for their partners, and I know you can likely relate to the stress of juggling a romantic relationship with a caregiver one. So kudos to John for that. Anyway, I had a spiritual awakening, and that was kind of what actually changed me. I just had this epiphany one day talking with John where my whole worldview shifted, and I thought, I don't feel like I have to question the universe anymore. I feel content in having faith in the unknown and not needing to have all the answers, and just being okay with where I'm at in the world. And, you know, having faith that I'm on the right path, and the world is going to take care of me. So it was like this 180 perspective shift that caused me to completely see the world differently, see myself differently, interact with people differently, show up to things differently. Like that was honestly the most crucial part of my sobriety, was having a spiritual awakening and the way it changed like every aspect of my life. So that was a couple of years ago, and I've been completely different ever since. Like, I've been genuinely happy. I haven't been depressed like ever. You know, I don't have the BPD episodes. I think that really was like around that time when all of that stopped. And so, you know, it took a long time to get there. It did take like 3.5 years before the promises, you know, they say sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. I didn't want it to be slowly, but, you know, 3.5 years later, I was okay, and I've been okay ever since. And today, I give it back through sponsoring, and like John said, I do mental health work in the research field. I do speaking engagements as a lived experience expert, and I've taken the worst things that have ever happened to me and turned them into something good. And I think that that is the most rewarding part of sobriety, is that this wasn't all for nothing, and that because I was able to get through that, I can help other people get through theirs too. And that's really the point of it all. Like, that's the 12th step, is giving it back. And so really grateful for the opportunity I have today to do that, and for my recovery, and for all of you. And so that's all I got. Thanks.
Thanks, Carolynn.